Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go! I live in a quiet corner of our state where hunting is a way of life. My grandpa and we go hunting for whitetail every now and then. It's a bonding experience, something that's been in our family for generations. After a successful hunt, we bring our catch back home, where we skin it, gut it, and prepare it for the table. You could say it's a tradition, one we cherish. One crisp autumn afternoon, we bagged a nice buck and did what any responsible hunters would do. We registered it. The law in our area required us to make sure everyone knew about our kill, so we headed back to our house to start the process. We decided to set our makeshift outdoor butchering station in the backyard, away from the road. We didn't want to shock any passing children with the sight of a freshly killed deer. Our house was shaped like a T, with one side facing the road and the other side facing away. We chose the latter to set up our hunting operation, with the deer hanging from a line stretching from our porch to a nearby tree. We got to work. My grandpa had his trusty knife and we began the process of removing the fur coat. The work was well underway when out of nowhere we heard an enthusiastic voice. "Whoa! What's that? So cool!" The excited voice came from behind us. I spun around, shocked to find a kid standing near our deer. The pelt was nearly off, so we had laid it over our Jeep's bumper. My grandpa, who couldn't hear very well without his hearing aid, had temporarily removed it due to some discomfort. I tugged at my grandpa's coat and he turned to me with a puzzled expression. I gestured for him to put his hearing aid back in, and he did so. I tried to explain the situation to him, but it seemed that the kid had disappeared as quickly as he had appeared. Thinking the kid was gone, we resumed our work. With a swift motion, my grandpa sliced into the deer, causing the guts to spill out. Just as we were about to remove them, a woman's voice pierced the air, filled with shock and disbelief. "What are you doing?" Before my grandpa could respond, the woman continued her tirade. "Shut up with your devil chants." I tried to reason with her. "This is private property and we will call the police if you do not leave right now." She looked somewhat apprehensive but stubbornly retorted, "Shut up, my kid can be here." I looked at her kid, who was standing behind her, tears welling up in his eyes. "Look what you did, you made him cry," she accused us. My grandpa and I exchanged bewildered glances. We had every right to be in our property, and this woman was practically trespassing. My grandpa decided it was time to assert our rights in this bizarre situation. He retrieved his shotgun, doing so with a dramatic flair seen in movies, lifting it up and then dramatically pumping it. I watched in awe. I had never seen someone handle a shotgun with such gravitas. The woman, seeing the shotgun, immediately fled with her crying child in tow. You would think she had learned her lesson, but no, she didn't. As we continued to remove the guts, she returned in her minivan, blocking the path for our vehicles to exit. Our property was fenced and we had posted private property signs, so she was clearly trespassing. My grandpa motioned for me to grab some cinder blocks, and we devised a plan to keep her vehicle from leaving. I placed around 4 cinder blocks behind her tires and stacked a few more to extend the barrier. She honked her horn incessantly, seemingly enjoying her newfound role as a nuisance. Unbeknownst to her, my grandpa wasn't one to be trifled with. He motioned for me to get back inside the house while he dealt with the situation. From the patio, I watched as the argument unfolded. The woman and her family were relentless. They argued, shouted, honked their horn like they were auditioning for a clown show. My grandpa, shotgun in hand, approached the situation cautiously. She kept honking and my grandpa decided to take action. He fired a shot into the ground in front of the car, causing her to slam on the brakes. The noise was deafening, but it did the trick. The woman screeched in reverse, her tiny car struggling to surmount the cinder block barricade, but there was no way out. My grandpa laughed heartily as she struggled in vain to free her vehicle. She got out of the car, her face red with rage, and screamed, "What have you done? You're going to pay!" My grandpa couldn't stop laughing, the absurdity of the situation seemingly getting the best of him. "I am calling the police!" the dad yelled angrily, grabbing his phone. The police arrived soon after and the family told their side of the story, tears streaming down their faces as they recounted the horror they had endured. But the officers saw through their theatrics, and they recognized the truth. They were trespassing and harassing us on our own property. In the end, the entitled family were arrested for trespassing and harassment, and my grandpa and I were left with a good laugh and a memorable story to tell for years to come. Hey guys, I just had to share this crazy story with you all. You won't believe the kind of entitlement I recently witnessed. It all started on a scorching July day in North Phoenix, right near a motel. I was just minding my own business when it all happened. There is even some police body camera footage which was released later of this encounter. Anyway, so there I was going about my day when I heard sirens wailing in the distance. I thought nothing of it at first, but then I saw 3 police officers approach this woman. Let's call her Karen for the sake of the story, who was causing quite a scene near the motel. It turns out she had been kicked out of her roommate's place for going berserk and even firing a gun. The officers approached her calmly and one of them asked if she had a firearm. But of course she denied having or firing a gun and even told the man who seemed to be the 911 caller to "Stay the F away from me." But here's where it gets really wild. She then claimed that she had proof that the man was threatening her and that someone else had fired the gun. The officers, trying to do their job right, talked with her for almost 10 minutes. And to be honest, they were patient and chill, trying to sort things out. With her permission, they searched her bag and found ammunition and illegal drugs. Yep, she was carrying illegal stuff with her. And guess what? They also discovered that she had an outstanding warrant for her arrest. You'd think she'd just cooperate and sort things out calmly, right? Well, think again. When one of the officers tried to handcuff her, she started struggling to get away. And then, out of nowhere, she pulled a handgun from her waist area. The situation went from bad to worse in an instant. Karen, instead of thinking sensibly, fired the gun. And it narrowly missed the officer, thank God. But they had to act fast. In self-defense, they returned fire and hit her twice. It was a shocking scene to say the least. The officers didn't stop there though. They performed first aid until the fire department arrived and took her to the hospital. She survived somehow. But wow, what a mess. Thankfully, no officers or bystanders were harmed during this chaotic mess. But man, you've got to give it to these officers for keeping their cool in a situation like this. Sadly, this story doesn't end here though. There is more to it. You see, this wasn't Karen's first encounter with the law and clearly not the last. In fact, it seems like she has a knack for getting into trouble. Fast forward to October and she's back in the headlines. This time she was in the custody of the county sheriff's office and she was taken to the medical center for a medical appointment. But you won't believe what happened next. As she was about to be brought back to jail, Karen managed to grab an officer's gun and fired a round outside the hospital. It's like she's determined to create chaos wherever she goes. Thankfully, no one was injured in this incident and officers managed to take the gun back from her. I got interested and looked this incident up and let me just tell you, the details were shocking. She was in restraints with handcuffs, shackles, and a belly belt. But somehow she stood up and tried to walk away. And that's when the struggle began. And she grabbed the officer's gun from his holster and fired a shot. Karen is now facing aggravated assault charges stemming from the shooting outside the hospital, and it's just not looking good for her. Let's hope she gets the punishment she deserves. It has been a very dramatic couple of weeks. I'm currently on holiday in my country of birth, and during my time here I had a rather unpleasant encounter that left me questioning whether I was in the wrong. So let me share the story from my perspective. I decided to catch up with an old friend of mine whom I hadn't seen in ages. We used to be really close back in the day and I thought it would be nice to reconnect. I suggested we go out for dinner, just the two of us, and to my surprise he asked if he could bring along 3 women and another guy he knew. I didn't mind. After all, I'm always up for meeting new people. I agreed to his request and even suggested that we go to the place I'd rented after dinner because, well, it was quite a nice spot. We settled on a restaurant and everyone seemed to be on board with the plan. We arrived and things started off well. People were ordering cocktails, lobster, sushi, you name it. We were all having a good time laughing and enjoying each other's company. But then came the moment that turned this seemingly pleasant evening into a chaotic mess. The bell. It arrived and it was a whopping 770 euros. I turned to my friend and suggested that we split it evenly among all of us, thinking it was a fair way to go about it. He seemed fine with the idea, but that's when things took a turn for the worse. The other guy at the table, who had indulged in a hearty meal himself, suddenly claimed he was broke and could only contribute 25 euros. I could feel tension building in the air. 2 of the women had gone strangely silent, their faces buried in their phones as if trying to escape the impending financial reckoning. The 3rd woman, though, had the audacity to openly and confidently suggest that I should be a gentleman and cover the entire bill. Her reasoning? You're clearly doing better. Well, I was taken aback by her assumption and asked her why she thought so. She replied, "That's what it seems like on Instagram." Now, let me clarify, my Instagram is nothing extravagant. It's filled with pictures from my holidays and some business-related content. No flashy cars or displays of wealth. I felt a growing sense of frustration at the entitlement of this suggestion. I reminded them that this was not a date, and I didn't even know these people. My friend chimed in, asserting that he wasn't dating them either. He'd met them all at work. It seemed like the situation was escalating quickly. The discussion devolved into a back and forth between the 3 of them, with phrases like too expensive and not fair being thrown around. I couldn't help but notice the hypocrisy. It was fair when they were indulging themselves with expensive orders. But suddenly, fairness became an issue when it was time to settle the bill. I was reaching the end of my patience and declared that I was no longer willing to split the bill evenly. Instead, I would only cover my portion, which amounted to 52 euros. I also announced that I would be heading home on my own. Surprisingly, my decision to leave offended them even more than my refusal to pay the full amount. With resolve, I stood up from the table, went to the counter, and informed the waiter of what I consumed. I paid my portion and returned to the table. As it turned out, aside from my friend, none of the others had enough money to cover the bill. Or so they claimed. I felt a slight pang of guilt as I watched them scramble to figure out how to pay their share. However, my frustration with their entitled attitude prevailed, and I didn't budge. Instead, I took a pity route and gave a generous tip to the waiter right in front of them. Had they not acted so entitled and had they discussed their expectations beforehand, I might have considered contributing more. But the way they handled the situation left me with little sympathy. So, there you have it, my perspective on a situation. Now I find myself wondering, am I the jerk for refusing to pay for the whole bill? And now, with some comments on a post. Someone saying, "Not the jerk. You invited your friend to have dinner with you and he proposed bringing along several of his friends, to which you consented. At no point did you indicate that you would be footing the entire bill or treating everyone to dinner. All of you are adults, and if they were facing financial constraints, they should have reconsidered the choice of restaurant or restrained their orders. It would have been considerate for them to inquire about the financial arrangement before placing their orders, as you rightly pointed out. If your friend conveyed the notion that you were covering the expenses for everyone without discussing this with you beforehand, then he's the one at fault for bringing an additional 4 adult guests without prior payment arrangements. I can imagine how incredibly uncomfortable that situation must have been. It's truly commendable that you stood your ground. It required a lot of courage. your friend should have stepped up on your behalf. Typically, when you go out for dinner with friends, it's understood that everyone covers their own expenses. It's pretty much an unspoken rule. Given that this was the first time you had met these individuals, it's entirely reasonable to say you weren't really friends yet. I used to live in a decent apartment building nestled between two neighbors, one to the right and another above me. Both of these neighbors had one thing in common: noisy kids. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm no Grinch when it comes to the cheerful sounds of children playing during the day. After all, kids will be kids. What I couldn't fathom was the utter chaos they unleashed late into the night, sometimes as late as 3 in the morning. My quest for a good night's sleep began with polite requests. Several times I composed messages in the building WhatsApp group, pleading with my neighbors to keep their children quiet during the nighttime hours. I wasn't the only one affected. It was a chorus of complaints from others who were sleep-deprived. Yet my pleas fell on deaf ears, or worse, received half-hearted responses from their parents who claimed they would try but couldn't make any promises. As my patience wore thin, I found myself counting the number of hours until the next morning, hoping for some respite from the nightly symphony of screaming and running feet. One day, fate decided to intervene in the form of a birthday gift from one of my dear friends. It was a magnificent soundbar, a piece of audio heaven that promised to elevate my music listening experience to a whole new level. Thrilled to bits, I decided to set it up immediately when I got home from work. The clock struck midnight, but in my excitement, I failed to realize just how late it had gotten. I had my rock playlist queued up, and the volume knob turned way past what would be considered courteous at this hour. As the music began to pulse through my apartment, I couldn't help but feel like a rock star in my own living room. I hopped on my computer, eager to explore the soundbar's features, and time slipped away as I lost myself in the music. It wasn't until around 2:30 a.m. that my reverie was interrupted by a series of loud knocks on my front door. My heart leaped into my throat as I scrambled to lower the volume on a soundbar. The knocking persisted, and I hurriedly made my way to the door, cursing my oversight and timing. I swung the door open, and there, standing before me, was my neighbor from the top floor. His face displayed a mixture of annoyance and exhaustion. I hadn't seen him up close before, and he looked like he hadn't had a good night's sleep in ages. I instantly regretted my music-induced escapade. Before he could utter a word, I quickly apologized, my voice filled with genuine regret. "I'm so sorry," I began. "I didn't realize it was this late. I'll turn it off right away." I didn't mention his kids or their nightly ruckus. Instead, I owned up to my mistake and offered a sincere apology. He nodded in acknowledgement, clearly relieved that I was willing to cooperate. "Thank you," he mumbled. "I appreciate it." With that, he turned and retreated to his apartment. The next morning, I woke up with a sense of guilt. My musical revelry had undoubtedly disturbed his sleep, just as his children's antics had disturbed mine. I couldn't help but wonder if this was a wake-up call our neighbors needed to understand the importance of quiet nights. What transpired over the following week surprised me. It was as if a miracle had occurred. Not a single night passed without silence reigning supreme in our building. The noisy kids, the same ones who had disregarded my earlier pleas for quiet, were suddenly as quiet as church mice. I couldn't fathom it. It was almost as if their parents had discovered the newfound ability to exercise control over their children's behavior during the night. The transformation was so drastic that I couldn't help but marvel at it.
And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.